I'm Jenny Gage, and this is Life Take Two.
When the cost of living devours the dignity of living, people start to question not their worth, but the system that told them their worth would save them. The people at the top have forgotten what struggle feels like. Or maybe they've convinced themselves that they never felt it at all. They look down from those penthouse balconies and convince themselves that those below just didn't hustle enough. They see poverty as a choice because to admit it's a condition would force them to see their own reflection in it. And somewhere along the way, they made compassion a sin. So for everyone screaming about handouts and free money, let's be honest about the math of it. The average SNAP benefit for a household in this country, not an individual, a household, is less than $350 a month. It's about $11 a day to feed an entire family. So that's not luxury. That's barely survival. Yet people talk about it as if it's some government jackpot, as if mothers are out here living the high life on food stamps. So we police grocery carts and we count the Oreos and we mock the mother who buys cupcakes for her kid's birthday. We shake our heads if someone on SNAP dares to get their nails done or buys a Coke or looks like they're enjoying their life at all, because the poor are supposed to look poor, so everyone else can feel secure in knowing who's beneath them.
Hey everybody, welcome to Life Take Two. I'm Jenny. I know there's a lot of great stuff out there on YouTube. I always appreciate you stopping on one of my videos. Now, I've been sick for like 5 days this week, so my voice is a little husky, but I did my makeup and put on a shirt today just so we can talk about some dialogue that I'm seeing going on around food stamps and the loss of the SNAP benefit. This government shutdown leading to families across America not getting benefits this month has led to a lot of discussion. And while yes, there are so many Americans who are kind and loving and doing amazing things, I've seen restaurants across the country who are offering free breakfast. We have some those little library boxes around in our city, some of which are being filled up with food instead of books right now. So yes, absolutely. A lot of people showing up in every way that they can. I've personally been donating to my local food bank, as well as making sure that the 2 unhoused young men that I help care for have as much food as I can get for them. But then there are a lot more people who are hateful and angry about recipients of food stamps than I ever imagined there were. And I've personally been stunned by some of the real life conversations and some of the comment threads that I've seen online. Here's my Arizona SNAP card that I was still using, that I qualified for until 2 years ago, last June. And it's funny and sad how embarrassing it was sometimes to use this card. I remember pulling it out just kind of nonchalantly one time at Fry's, and as I was swiping my card, a total stranger, a man behind me, just saying, "Oh, brother," and then just like looking at me. That was all he said. He said absolutely nothing else, just, "Oh, brother." I don't know, I didn't look poor enough. Some of my followers know me from this video that I posted to my TikTok 2 years ago, May. And this video was filmed because I had stopped at Trader Joe's. I needed milk, bread, bananas, lunch meat, a couple of different things. I think I needed some mayonnaise. And before going into Trader Joe's, I opened up my phone app to make sure that I had some money in the bank. I thought I had $60. I only had $20. And so because I was documenting my divorce and documenting my life, I whipped out my phone and filmed. And this video that hit almost 6 million views in just a couple of days got me personally so much hate. People saying like, if you're that poor, how do you even have a car? Why are you wearing eyeliner? Obviously, you're able to like have your hair done at the salon. You should be able to afford food. That video, by the way, was the last week of the month when I had already used up my SNAP benefits for the month for me and my kids. We only got a few $100s a month for our family. And we would always run out, despite the fact that I make a lot of our food at home, despite the fact that I was really, budget friendly. And it really struck me, just the anger that people had towards me in that video, that I was in a place where I was needy. And by the way, I'm naturally blonde, and if I do ever color my hair, I do it myself. I get a coupon. I go to like Walgreens and I buy a box of hair color, like in the winter when I'm freshening up my color. Today, I'd like to read for you my story of how I became homeless, and I actually tie some of my real life friends who were experiencing post-divorce poverty after being stay-at-home moms, trad wives. We all became displaced homemakers, so that you can see what that looks like. This article is on my Substack, and it is entitled "A Man Is Not a Plan." Melissa ties the strings of her once white Nikes, car keys dangling from her pinky finger, as she sends a voice text to her gang of teenagers. There are only 5 eggs left. I'll buy more on my way home from work in the morning. Don't let the dog off his leash at the park anymore. Dad will get Emily and Ben from school. She locks the door of the 1990s apartment behind her and heads to work just as the sun slides behind the hills. She can see an orderly sprinting across the lobby through the glass doors as she approaches the nursing home entrance. Night has fallen. So has Mabel, while trying to climb out of bed again, and everyone was clambering to her aid. Melissa checks in and collects her cart from the supply room, making sure she restocks the adult diapers and wipes, hand sanitizer, and gloves before starting her rotation through the rooms. As her 5 teenagers sleep at their dad's house, she diapers World War II veterans, pulls blankets over lavender-scented grandmothers, and mops an occasional floor. While the graveyard shift is hard to adjust to, this job is easier than her last gig at the Adult Special Needs Center and far less physical. After being attacked by a large male resident with a glass blender pitcher that left the back of her skull bleeding and badly bruised, she was more than willing to work during her normal sleeping hours in the interest of personal safety. At the end of a relatively quiet 10-hour shift, she speeds home, pulling into the driveway just in time to collect her youngest 2 for the carpool to school. Beth sits on her navy blue corduroy couch, typing away at a script for her podcast with her beautiful legs curled beneath her, hiding all but the smallest edge of a lacy floral tattoo. She brushes her blonde bangs away from her reading glasses, deletes a sentence, then jumps as her young autistic son, Max, hurdles the back of the couch to land on her outstretched leg. On the carpet surrounding the sofa, items you would expect to see in a family home lay in wait for someone with time to bend down and pick them up. A small tennis shoe without a mate, mangled dog chew toys, a sparkly lavender hairbrush with a scrunchie twisted around the handle, granola bar crumbs and wrappers, clusters of Legos. Beth is the 26-day-a-month caretaker of her smiling son, for which the state reimburses her with a minimum wage check. Because of Max's needs, she's unable to get a full-time job out in the world, so today she's chipping away at her quest for financial stability by coaching and podcasting from her living room. She will be occupied most of the day by childcare, but will have uninterrupted time for a few hours when Max and his sister are sleeping before she collapses on the couch. Amber taps the send button on an email addressed to the parents of a student in her closet of an office behind the front desk of a rambling elementary school in Utah. As she swivels her chair toward the file cabinet, she sees staffers spring from their chairs and flock to the window. The registrar shouts, "They're towing your minivan, Amber," before running out the front door. Amber trails her into the snowy parking lot where the tow truck driver explains that her soon-to-be ex-husband is taking back his car. He hands her an envelope with the paperwork showing that the Maroon Odyssey is owned by Josh Coolidge, who is paying to have it towed home. There's nothing she can do. The car she's driven her kids around the country in for the past 8 years belongs to her husband. Amber rubs cold tears off her cheeks as she sobs, feeling all the more humiliated when she turns back toward the building and sees the faces of her students and colleagues peering back at her. I want to pause right here just to reiterate that each one of these stories is a real-life woman who's close to me. One of them is my sister. One of them is one of my best friends. One of them is another close friend whose husband repossessed her minivan from the school that she was working at while she was working. These are real stories of real women in America. Here's me. Jenny reaches high above her head to grab the blue metal handle of the storage unit door. She takes one last look at the IKEA bunk bed, Rubbermaid boxes of camping gear, TV, small couch, and other items that are now everything she owns in the world, as she pulls the door shut at her feet and clamps the padlock tight. She has spent an exhausting Saturday helping a crew of friends and her children and her new boyfriend, Kev, pack the contents of her home into trailers and truck beds, heading not for a new home, but for storage. After locking up, she walks to her Mercedes SUV where her kids are waiting to be driven to their temporary homes. She'll soon walk each one to the door of a friend's house with a small box of the belongings they'll need for school. It's in the hug and goodbye with the kids on the doorsteps of friends that her new reality begins to hit. Tonight, she will not be shouting down the hallway to ask if teeth are brushed and homework done. Won't be flipping their lights off, kissing their foreheads and telling them goodnight. Jenny no longer has a home, and she and her children have scrambled to couch surf wherever they can. Her hands shake as the door of the last friend's home closes behind her, and she walks down the front walkway toward her SUV without a final destination in mind for herself. It's a lot to ask her new boyfriend to crash with him in the guest bedroom he rents from a friend, but the backseat of her car just seems like rock bottom in a way that she's not yet able to comprehend. She's as hungry as she is terrified, but she has literally no food to eat and no money to buy anything. So she texts Kevin to tell him she's on her way to his place if that's okay, and is thrilled to see a bit of Chipotle leftovers on the nightstand by his small bed. She falls asleep in her jeans, too tired to go back out to the Mercedes and dig around for pajamas. These women have one very important commonality. They're all former Mormon trad wives or stay-at-home moms, though none of them had ever heard the phrase trad wife until recently. Jenny and Amber had identified themselves as housewives or homemakers. Melissa and Beth simply viewed themselves as stay-at-home moms. The trad wife archetype ostensibly aesthetics and even fetishizes such roles with potentially horrifying consequences to the young women wooed by a superficially winsome yet fundamentally retrograde ideal, wherein the lived realities of those wives caught in it are a far cry from the seductive, leisurely promises of the lifestyle. When you read the sentence, former Mormon trad wife, your mind probably fills with images of kitchen tables spread with steaming dishes of home-cooked food, goats being milked against Utah mountain peaks, toddlers in gunny sack dresses, sticking the tips of their fingers into fluffy cake frosting. And of course, the unusually stunning domestic goddess behind it all smiling into her camera as she kneads a blob of bread dough. You will think of Nara Smith and Hannah Neeleman, and your belly will feel warm, like you've been fed a steaming bowl of soup while flipping through a Norman Rockwell calendar. But I ask you to snap out of it and focus on a key word in my story: former. You see, the trad wife life has a fatal flaw, which none of the women on social media who produce their domestic erotica want you to think about as they knead dough and milk goats and smile at their iPhones. A flaw that the men in their orbits, their husbands and fathers, bishops and prophets, and in fact the entire patriarchal family system at the center of the Mormon Church, the $300 billion plus that the Mormon Church has amassed, don't want any of us to pay attention to. The fatal flaw is brutally simple. Adult dependency on a romantic relationship for basic survival is a dangerous gamble. A basic risk-benefit analysis would prove it's high risk with too low of a potential benefit to engage in. Not to mention, wage equivalent of the standard docket of services performed by a stay-at-home mom is thought to be close to $200,000 annually, according to Salary.com. But millions of women across the country fall into, if not actively pursue, the stay-at-home mom lifestyle without a second thought. For many, their picket fence dreams come true. Daytime adventures to the zoo with their toddlers, sleeping in late with newborns, being able to be the biggest fan of their middle school athlete at every single game, all while being blissfully protected from the horrors of higher education and the climb up the career ladder. For more and more young women, inflation and low-paying job options are obstacles seemingly too daunting to overcome. So even girls raised in otherwise liberal households with flexible gender roles are drawn to trad wife life as a more leisurely, attainable option than economic autonomy. It's easier to attract a millionaire than to become one, and easier to make his home-cooked meals and have his babies than pay for college. That is, until the other shoe drops and they become a former trad life like me. My Mormon upbringing was nothing but a housewife immersion program designed to prepare me for literally nothing in life but wifehood. From the time I was in elementary school, I often shadowed my mom in our small ranch house, learning to change diapers and warm bottles for an ever increasing number of new baby brothers and sisters. In many ways, my mom needed my assistance as much as she wanted to train me in the domestic arts. When my friends were at the mall in high school, I was keeping my baby brother entertained and safe and folding laundry so my mom could run to the grocery store. I thought I had escaped housewife fate when I left home for BYU, Idaho, but I was quickly disappointed. Mormon college was less a place for young Mormon women like myself to learn revenue generating skills than it was a place for young Mormon men to wife shop. So my counselors gave no thought whatsoever to a future version of myself that would need to go to work outside the home. I would have my first marriage proposal before the end of my first semester at school, just 3 months after my 18th birthday. And would see that boy off on his mission first before ultimately marrying somebody else, Stinky Jake, while my first fiance was away preaching the Book of Mormon to strangers in the Ohio suburbs. At age 20, my education and career would cease abruptly as I married a freshly returned missionary for time and all eternity in the Portland, Oregon temple. It's chilling now to look back at the moment of trust that I had in those temple vows. If he said forever, then he must have meant it. My ex-husband had taken an oath in front of God, angels, and witnesses, and I believed him. So much so that I shaped my future around our couplehood with no thought for possible marital collapse, not a single safety in place for a future without him. We twain were one flesh from that moment on. What was mine was his, what was his was mine. It didn't matter if I signed papers at the title company for our first home or not. We were one, and his home was my home. I didn't need a job or a bank account. Heavenly Father had made us to be two halves of the same whole, and my half of the responsibility was to bear and nurture children and make our home a heaven on earth, while his was to run our business and provide everything our family needed. What he provided was a blessing to me from him and from God, and my name didn't need to be on any paycheck or LLC. We would spend 24 years building together, building businesses, building our family, building homes and friendships, and I would find myself, in some ways, living a dream, at least a dream for some. I would eventually tuck 5 beautiful children to bed at night under their Pottery Barn bedspreads, drive them to gymnastics and ballet and football in my shiny BMW, followed by a shiny Mercedes, then a shiny big Lincoln Navigator, and finally a Honda Odyssey after we'd outgrown normal cars, and would work diligently to manage the crew of housekeepers that maintained our massive custom homes. Like Hannah and Nara, Beth, Melissa, and Amber, my tradwife lifestyle was almost utterly idyllic, except for the abuse behind the scenes. But that's its own separate topic. Then one day it ended, and I found myself standing beside the man who was supposed to be the love of my life and hearing him introduce me to the court assistant as his ex-wife, Jenny. And my world would implode. Within a few days at the end of my marriage, I would be unable to pay for $43 of groceries at Trader Joe's. Within a few months, I would lose my home, unable to pay the rent with a $220 weekly check I was bringing home from the first adult job I'd ever had. I would have to pack everything away in a storage unit somewhere in the suburbs of Gilbert, Arizona, hoping for the court to enforce alimony, which it never did. Like my fellow former Mormon tradwives, I would work harder than I ever had to make less money than I'd ever imagined, doing things I never thought I'd do to keep my kids fed and sheltered, like selling family heirlooms to buy groceries, driving to the Catholic Food Bank to collect a weekly box of non-perishables, and sending GoFund links to friends for gas money, all while wondering how the life I'd worked so hard to build for him and me had slipped through my fingers. I turned 50 in a week. I'm actually 51 now. I wrote this last year. And was recently digging through photos in my Facebook looking for the picture my ex-husband took on my 40th birthday. It was almost startling to peer at forgotten pictures on my screen of my former tradwife self standing on the porch of $1 million home, flanked by blue-eyed kids and their trad dad. The feeling was not dissimilar to watching Kate and Jack kiss in the Renault below deck in the Titanic, knowing, of course, as I watched that love scene, that the ship was about to hit the iceberg. The woman in these photos had no idea that the home, the family, dinner, the man holding her hand, the dog under the table are a few years, then a few months, then a few days away from just being a memory. That the life she was living would be completely inaccessible to her without him. One night, October of 2018, I fell asleep curled up in bed with my husband in my home. By lunchtime the next day, everything would change. The life of the trad wife in my Facebook memories abruptly interrupted. I may never again be a homeowner. Will almost certainly never again wear such nice high heels or pose for pictures with that man. The kids are mostly grown and scattered across Arizona and Utah, their childhood memories marked by the bleak trauma of homelessness and poverty as they, with their former stay-at-home mom, were ejected from their happily ever after long before the end. I'm now living a life that absolutely nobody ever told me I would live, and it's hard not to wish I could go back and tell my younger self to change a few things. Tell her that she was taking a risk that would prove more devastating than driving her BMW without a seatbelt, despite what the smiling TikTok moms and all the people selling things to young mothers want you to believe. The truth is, if I was investing in my own retirement account or working on a degree, I wouldn't have had the extra money to buy sourdough supplies and cookbooks, and I certainly would not have had the free time to wait for a loaf to rise and bake, or the free time to watch these women on TikTok. Instead of selling lifestyles, I wish we could sell our daughters actual good lives. Imagine if we all start being honest about the risks that women take and teach them to safeguard their futures. A man is not a plan. Never really was and never should be. Security, healthcare, access to housing and food, the ability to put gas in a car should never hinge on a man loving you. The end of a relationship, in my opinion, should be heartbreaking, but not the catastrophe that is a very real risk with which every so-called trad wife in America may grapple. Here's a thought that I'd like to just pause on for a moment. Every time you see somebody in a grocery store with an EBT card, there is a story behind it. My story is a despicable person who calls himself a man but is not, who financially abandoned and then terrorized his family, leading to abject poverty and homelessness after 24 years of marriage, and then courts who didn't do their job to enforce. There was one court hearing that we had during the pandemic where I was crying and said, I am completely homeless. At that point, he was $16,000 past. He had that much arrearages. And I was just asking the court to enforce and make him do a purge payment of some type. And the judge said, clearly he's not able to pay this. And he had to make a $200 payment. That was the only forced payment that the court ever offered me. Other people may be experiencing multi-generational poverty where they don't have the privilege and the resources to get an education, and they don't even know how to do that. And as inflation and the cost of living escalates, they are less and less able to just keep up. I have a good friend whose son had a burst appendix without health insurance, which led to a medical bankruptcy, which led to the loss of their home. I had a medical bankruptcy and a loss of my own home many years ago when I had my ovarian tumor. There's so many reasons why people end up in need. And behind every single person standing there at the grocery store with that card, there are so many factors that have led to them being there. But just being lazy, just being stupid, that's not it. I was actually working 3 different jobs after my divorce. I couldn't do anything. I didn't have any skills, no college. I also had health problems, and I was a full-time mom. I got full custody of the kids. So I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to get my windshield orders in. I was working as a windshield sales rep. And then I'd go to school where I was working as an assistant in a classroom for $11 an hour. I made $44 a day, 4 hours a day. I had that job. And then I would come home and work for my uncle, going out to architects and selling some cabinetry. Eventually, I would start a furniture flipping business in my backyard. A lot of my TikTok followers, like, that's when you first started following me, when I was very disabled and completely homebound. So I was flipping furniture, and that wasn't great money, but for the first time ever, I was able to put gas in my car and, like, buy my kids some new socks, and that was amazing. And then, of course, I started my social media, and to this day, if I didn't have my podcast and my social media and the social media management company that I've founded, that I run in addition to this, I don't know what I'd be doing. I'd still be on food stamps. I'd still be extremely income deprived. Just this past October a year ago, before I started my YouTube, after multiple surgeries and some other things too in my life, I couldn't pay my rent. I still couldn't afford groceries. Not because I'm stupid, not because I'm lazy, but because a woman who's never had any skills and didn't have a career, and whose husband abandoned her in her mid-40s when she had nonstop health crises, has very few options to really make it. And I will say too that, like, I did keep up. Like, I made sure that our rent was paid, and we always, paid our water. We had gas in the car, but I needed that little bit of help with this SNAP. That few $100s a month, just making sure that, like, some of our nutrition needs were covered, was life-changing. I needed that. And in a lot of ways, being able to have this help to feed my kids while I rebuilt my life and was able eventually to be able to support myself more fully was a very necessary support for me being able to get to where I am today. Kevin and I have 7 kids between the two of us. 3 of them are grown and out of the home, 2 in college, then 3 teenagers. Our life is really expensive, and we're just trying to do the best for our kids, and so is everybody. We got to take care of each other, you guys. That's what humans do. I'm a little bit bothered that I have people from around the world in my comment section who are stating the obvious, that Americans are jerks, that only in America would the president cancel people's food cards, and would other people be hating on the poor people who need their food cards. It's embarrassing. We got to take care of each other, you guys. All right, I'm going to go rest my voice. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.